And the trial continues today for the man accused of running down and killing a Toronto police officer in 2021. The Crown is cross-examining a reconstruction expert called by the defense yesterday. Barry Raftery testified that based on the damage to Umar Zameer's BMW, he believes that Constable Jeffrey Northrup was already on the ground when he was run over. His testimony contradicts that of a police reconstructionist who was called by the Crown, who concluded that the officer had been knocked down by the reversing car and then run over when the car drove forward. So Umar Zameer has pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder. He is expected to take the stand in his own defense this week. And for a closer look at the trial, we're joined live in studio by Sharif Foda, a criminal defense lawyer. Okay, Sharif, thank you very much for joining us. So first off, we have these two separate reconstructionists coming together. Of course, their stories are contradicting each other. And then we have, Umar Zameer, his wife is saying one thing, and then we also have the police officer saying one thing. We got, two sides. Put this together for us.
In his defense counsel's opening statement, I think he made clear that he expected that the jury would hear contradictory narratives. So it's not surprising that we're seeing a conflict in the evidence. The defense theory is that there are witnesses who are not being forthright, and that the independent evidence and the evidence as a whole supports an inference that it's an accident. He's also going to, I think, be strongly relying on the notion that it just doesn't make sense for a family man with his pregnant wife and his toddler to all of a sudden decide to murder a police officer out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads to this. I mean, they were celebrating Canada Day. They were just going back to their car. And this is something that, we were just talking about earlier with the whole Veltman trial. How does this all come together? He's with his family. They thought that they were in danger. Tell us about that narrative and how that plays out with this.
Right. Well, anyone living in Toronto understands that, we live in a great city. Issues with public safety plague most large cities in the world. Toronto's no exception. And given that this was on the heels of the Veltman terrorist attack and issues that we see downtown all the time, I don't think the jury is going to be surprised that the defense theory is that that Mr. Zameer and his spouse were on edge when this happened, and that could have influenced their state of mind when approached by undercover police officers. You'll recall there were other civilian witnesses who testified that they didn't know or believe that these were police officers either.
Okay, so we have already heard from Zameer's wife. We are expecting him to take the stand at any point. Is this a good move? Is this a good idea? What could this do? How could this harm things?
Very good question. The burden of proof always rests with the prosecution. They have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant never has an obligation to testify, and the judge will instruct the jury that he could remain silent, and the Crown has the burden. By testifying in his own defense, I think that sends two messages. One, he wants to respond to the story that police witnesses have said about him. And two, he's not afraid to subject himself to cross-examination in front of the jurors, as the other witnesses had to do.
Okay, so let's talk about this first-degree murder charge right here. What are the different scenarios, the different ways that this could all play out at the end?
Right. So there will be a question of whether or not what we call a lesser included offense can be left with the jury, second-degree murder or manslaughter. I would expect that the Crown would argue that manslaughter should be left with the jury. That is to say that verdict is available for them if they reject the verdict of first-degree murder. And I would expect that the defense might argue that no, the Crown theory all along has been that this is an intentional killing, and you shouldn't leave manslaughter with the jury. The defense theory is accident. It's either first-degree murder or not guilty. We'll see what the judge instructs them.
And, when it comes down to it, the timeline of this, this goes all the way back to 2021. How much longer do you see this playing out? And when it comes to the outcome of this, what are you expecting?
Well, I would expect the trial to wrap up, barring any unforeseen circumstances, sometime in the next week, maybe two at most, I would guess. And once there's a verdict, then the parties decide if they're going to file a notice of appeal and seek an appeal. They would have to do that within 30 days of the verdict being rendered, or 30 days of the sentence being imposed if Mr. Zameer is found guilty of any offenses. And appeals typically can take 1-2 years. So one would hope that there would be some finality to the trial, and a verdict would give closure to everyone involved. But it could be a while yet.
And when it comes to this type of case, you have a civilian, a peace officer, and then we also have, the jury. Put this all together in terms of Canadian history.
It's very, it comes at a very interesting time. We live in a very different world than Canadians did at Confederation. We live in a multicultural society where there are very wide-ranging views about the role of police and police officers in Canadian society. I think this trial will show that all members of Canadian society, wherever we come from, whoever the conflict is with, are entitled to fair trials. Our justice system is very strong, so I'm confident that Mr. Zameer will get a fair trial.
Criminal defense lawyer Sharif Oda, thank you very much for your time and your insight.